I'm here to talk about a study I carried out in Mumbai, that's where I come from. And it deals with the psychological, social, and cultural shifts that people have to deal with when they move into a tall building. Now, Mumbai is a mega metropolitan city. It's home to 21 million inhabitants. It's ranked as the 7th most populous city in the world, but over an area of roughly 600 square kilometers in the main metropolitan area, it has a population density of 20,000 people per square kilometer. To give you a reference, Shanghai has a population density of around 4,000 people per square kilometer. So the land rates have been escalating at an alarming rate. The housing costs are through the roof, thank you. So the only way to build at all is to build tall. So tall buildings are a necessity in Mumbai. But what this has done is it has caused a disparity. You have some of the largest number of under construction high-rises in Mumbai, but at the same time you have the largest number of slums in South Asia. And you already have 75 buildings that are above 125 meters, but you have buildings that are going to be in the 250 to 500 meter category. So the problem here is that we are having a lot of tall buildings, but the infrastructure isn't keeping pace with this sort of development. These are some of the tall buildings in Mumbai. Those are the Imperial Towers, Godrej Millennium. So what this inspired me to do was conduct a study, like I said, because the whole of Mumbai, or a major part of Mumbai, is undergoing this radical transition. So people living on the 3rd floor previously suddenly find themselves looking out of the 30th floor apartment. And that's quite a change. And that entails a lot of social and cultural shifts, like I said. So what I did was I carried out a survey for people living in both luxury, high-end high-rises, as well as low-income housing, in the form of online questionnaires or even personal interviews. And when I talk about low-income housing, this doesn't necessarily mean houses that people can afford, but these are houses that are promoted by the government for people living in slums. And these are sort of rehabilitation projects that the government has been promoting for the past 2 decades. So let's look at the results of the luxury high-rises first. The first question that I had to ask them, why would you buy a house in a tall building? So you can see that the major reason was to buy a larger house. So that tells you that if you want to buy a new house or a larger house in Mumbai, it would inevitably be in a tall building. And what is interesting here is the green graph. People want to be part of a social and culturally happening community. Because people who live in these tall buildings, in these luxury high-rises, are from affluent backgrounds. They're from a successful class of people. So you get to be part of that community, and that is something that people are willing to pay money for. And amenities, of course. Reasons for selecting a particular floor. View is but obvious. I was looking out of the 59th floor of my hotel room, and I just could not stop looking out. So that is a very important aspect, of course. Social status. And some people, maybe out of fear of heights or I don't know what, they like living on the ground floor and being close to green spaces. So that may tell you something. People want to be closer to green spaces, and hence they may not select a floor that is higher above. Right. This is important. This was also spoken about in the plenary session in the morning. Community interaction. You can see that more than 50% said that community interaction or interaction with neighbors decreased as they moved into a tall building. And after that, a major part of the people really didn't care, but I think that's just because they're from a city. But this tells you something. Tall buildings aren't really social environments, and that is something that we really need to focus on, and it has been the focus of this conference. Right, the most coveted amenities. Of course, parking and high-speed elevators are obvious amenities that you need to have in a tall building. But floor-to-ceiling glass panels in homes for better views. Well, if you're going to invest so much of money in buying a flat on one of the higher floors, you need to maximize that investment. So that stood out. And what is interesting here is if you look at the graph, which is second to last, light and water saving devices. People care about saving water and light, those people that live in these luxury high-rises. And of course, what is interesting was the dog parks. People want dog parks because a lot of these people, of course, have pets, and you can't take them to the common parks that you have in these buildings. So dog parks was interesting. Most common concerns. Out of all this, what I was really happy about was that people cared about the perceived impact on the environment. That's startling for a city like Mumbai, where you don't really have a lot of green buildings. But this is a class of people who are more aware of their surroundings, who are aware of what is happening around the globe because they're rich. And they have started caring that the building that they live in may possibly have an impact on the global environment. So they really were concerned about that. And dust accumulation, temperature control were other problems that they spoke about, especially on the higher floors. You want to open your windows, but you really can't because of the wind speeds and probably a lot of dust. So they have to keep it closed. And then what's the point if you're buying a house on a higher floor and you can't even open your windows? And psychologically, escape or safety in a situation of emergency or a calamity. A lot of people said that if they heard some report of, say, an earthquake or some sort of calamity in a region that was near to their region of residence, they would feel a little more scared if they were living on a higher floor or even in a tall building than, say, in a low-rise development. Frequently asked questions to developers. Now, approvals and licenses are, everybody talks about that. But again, sustainability measures and green rating, the last graph. People are asking about sustainability rating. I mean, that's amazing. So I think this should encourage people in Mumbai, the developers, to start thinking about really making their buildings green. And that would really contribute a lot to Mumbai as a city and even India as a country. But apart from that, as a structural engineer, whenever I hear about people describing how beautiful a building is, it's always the architect. And nobody talks about the structural engineer. So here, you can see the purple graph. People are asking about structural engineers. Wow, I'm happy. That gives me hope and probably encouragement to get my master's degree. To sum it up, of course, I've not shown all the graphs here because you can find them in the paper. But to sum it up, for high-end apartments, people are, of course, happy about the view and the amenities, but the social pride that goes with it. But what also goes up is lethargy for vertical travel. People are really lazy. They don't want to go down again and again. In fact, this was an issue that was raised in the plenary session in the morning. Low-rise developments rely a lot on the ground floor to use as a sort of connecting device to recreational amenities or even convenience stores. But a person living on the 30th floor, if he wants to buy some sort of small knickknacks or maybe a chewing gum, they're not going to go down all the way for that. And that reduces your inclination towards frequent vertical travel. And of course, what also goes down is your community and neighborly interaction, and that is not a good thing. That is definitely not a good thing. So, looking at all these results, what would an ideal high-rise in Mumbai look like? Well, because people are lazy, maybe it would be a good idea to have your recreational amenities, groceries, and even convenience stores within the building itself. Not even on the premises, within the building itself. Now, that would encourage people to really, hit the gym or even go buy that chewing gum from the grocery store. Vehicular movement studies. Now, this is an issue that is crucial to Mumbai as a city. I'll give you an example. There is a 30-feet wide road, and there are these two amazing, luxury, beautiful-looking high-rises coming up on both the sides with parking spaces for 5,000 cars each. Now, imagine during peak hours when people want to go to work, what is going to happen to that road? So Mumbai has probably one of the worst traffic problems anywhere in the world. and they don't even follow the rules. Traffic lights are just suggestions. That's a popular joke I've been hearing throughout this conference. So what do? So vehicular movement studies are very important, but apart from that, if you include these recreational amenities, like I mentioned, even community hubs or places of leisure and entertainment within the building premises itself, you will be giving lesser opportunity or reasons for people to move out of that building, maybe on weekends or whatever. And it would probably be a good way to reduce the to and fro movement of the vehicles in that space. So I'm not going to talk about the infrastructure and how horrible it is in Mumbai, but this as a building would probably be a very good way to make it self-sustainable. Sky gardens and green space is very important. This was also spoken about by Mr. Wong in the plenary session, and I really, really like that idea. Now, these two amenities came across as highly sought-after provisions in the survey. People love being in contact with nature, and that's missing in Bombay. So what I mean to say is, this slide here, this was one of the projects we worked on in Bangalore, India. Now, imagine this space, it's a section, stacked maybe multiple times to give you a tall building. So you have this courtyard style of space, which is so crucial to traditional Indian housing, where you have a garden which can be accessed by 3 or 4 floors. So not only does it give you a green space, but it's a space where people can interact, neighborly interaction, community involvement. And that is going back to basics of traditional Indian housing, and that might really work. So what WOHA is doing and what they showed in the morning is something that really, really needs to be done in India, and especially Mumbai. Having those green spaces would also be a good way to reduce problems of dust accumulation, wind speeds, reduction in noise, because they will act as a buffer zone. And what stood out again from all these graphs is that people are caring about green rating and sustainability. So if you have a building that is actively sustainable, where you can actually feel that you are in a structure that is taking measures to save the environment or at least reduce the impact, people will feel more comfortable living in it because it wouldn't hold them directly responsible for harming the environment. And I'm sure they would sell faster. So developers in Mumbai really need to start thinking about that. So that was luxury, high-end high-rises. But this is the more interesting part of my survey. This was for low-income housing, and I'll just show you some of the images. This is a low-income housing project, by the way. It's pretty good. My building isn't as impressive as this. You can see that here there are only 24 floors. But imagine, I mean, that may not come across as a very tall building, but imagine moving a person from a ground floor structure or a G+1 structure into that sort of a environment, and it's pretty tall. It's radical change. The house quality is good. You have all these fire safety equipment. Right. So out of the 21 million inhabitants of Mumbai, 55% live in slums. That's massive. And these people who live in slums, they come from all over India in search of better opportunities, employment, leaving behind their traditional businesses. But they aren't necessarily illiterate, unemployed, or some of them are, in fact, graduates who work in fancy glass buildings and big corporate firms. But they simply cannot afford the housing costs in Mumbai, and hence they are forced to live in slums. So what the government has been trying to do for the last 2 decades to free up the land occupied by these slums to make way for more development is that they're providing either free or low-income housing, low-cost housing for these sort of people. Free housing would be for people who have been displaced because of the slum rehabilitation projects. And low-cost housing would be for people who, say, for example, there was this textile boom of textile mills in the 1980s in Mumbai, but that shut down because of more global firms like Reliance. But so these people who worked in these textile mills were then displaced and out of work. So what do you do with that much of labor? So they were also employed elsewhere by the government, but they were given these housing schemes for very low cost. And I conducted surveys with these kind of people. Of course, they did not have access to internet, so personal interviews. And there were 3 categories of people here. One was who were about to move, scheduled to move into this sort of rehabilitated space. One category were people who were already living in such a building. And the third one was for people who had already moved out because they didn't really like it. They didn't like living there. Okay, so percentage of people looking to move into these sort of buildings. Now you can see that there's a nice variation in the demographics. Senior citizens above 65 years or 60 years don't want to move, but young children want to move. This is, I think, opposite to the trends that you see in tall building surveys conducted in Chicago. And because I had attended that session conducted by Mr. Anthony Wood. So I'll give you a story for this. I was conducting a survey for a family living in a slum that was scheduled to move. And this gentleman who was 65 years old, and he was retired, of course, he did not want to move because he had created this nice social circle of his friends. And all he would do the entire day was probably move around his area and talk to his friends, and that's all. But when he would be shifted to that rehabilitated space, the tall building, all this would be lost. These people were going to be scattered. He would not be really able to spend his day doing anything other than probably looking out of his nice window that offered a nice view. And that was taking out his whole social life, uprooting it, and probably leaving him devastated, really, disrupting his whole life. But on the other hand, in the same family, his grandson, who is 19 years old, he worked in a call center. He was also studying at the same time. Now, he really wanted to move because he was working with people who were already living in these kind of spaces, who were working in these kind of spaces. His friends had good apartments. So it was obvious that owning an apartment in a tall building in Mumbai was a dream come true for him. Primary reasons for wanting to move, for those wanting to move: legal recognition. Slums are not legally recognized structures. So when the government gives them these free houses, they are legally recognized apartments in Mumbai. Expectation of amenities, very important. So slums are spaces where you do not really have clean water supply, sanitation, or even privacy. A lot of women don't have privacy to even conduct their daily businesses, and that's sad. But when they move into these tall buildings or just rehabilitation spaces, they get all this, and of course they have to pay for it. But they still get it, and that's a huge improvement in their lives. Improved access to roads. Slums are basically mazes. You can't really navigate. And when you move into a building, it becomes much easier in times of emergencies, medical emergencies, or calamities, because the ambulances can actually reach your doorstep. And finally, sense of an ownership of an apartment in Mumbai, and that too free. How can it get better than that? So, right. Once they move in, now these are people who've already moved in, sorry. What do they complain about? Lack of amenities. Now, I've said that they want to move in because there are amenities, expectation of amenities, but not all these expectations get fulfilled. So they may have water supply, but it's not 24 hours. They may have electricity, but it's not 24 hours, and it's not free, because earlier it was free, electricity stealing. And a lot of these buildings are constructed in a very haphazard manner with no regards for architectural bylaws like light and ventilation. You can see blocks constructed right besides each other, so there is no daylight penetration either. Lack of space for commercial and business purposes is very, very crucial for what Bombay is about, because a lot of cottage industries, a lot of small-scale entrepreneurs work out of their houses in slums, and they support industries like edibles and fashion, accessories, leather goods, tanneries. And this space is lost when they move into a building which is legally recognized as a residential building. They cannot operate their commercial ventures. This is an interesting graph. The blue graphs represent people who live in slums, and the red represent people who have moved into rehabilitated spaces. You can see that the health graph, the fourth one, health expenditures have reduced, which means moving into such a space is for the better, and they are healthy. But now look at the food graph. Look at the education graph. Why has the expenditure on food reduced? It should probably increase. But when they move into such a building, they have to start paying for electricity. They have to start paying for maintenance, society charges. So that would compromise their ability to spend on food, education, and even clothing. But at the same time, structural modification expenditure has gone down because you move from makeshift structures to strong, structurally designed structures. So probably because of that, their savings have also gone up. So this is a very nice comparison. So concluding for this sort of survey, it is imperative that you don't leave designs of such public housing or mass housing schemes to mere architectural imagination. You have to conduct surveys of what humans really need and that are pertinent to the cities that they live in. And one of the major aspects in Mumbai is the commercial and workspace that they lose. And providing that would probably be a good idea. And apart from that, a lot of people suggested that if these buildings were transformed into revenue-generating models for the developer, then the developer would even start caring about what happens to the building once he constructs it, and not just leave it at the mercy of these people who really don't know what to do with it. So revenue-generating models. And to end it all, I would just like to point out that I really don't know even one building in Mumbai that can be afforded by people just starting out in their lives or those who don't really have fancy jobs, high-paying jobs. Middle-income housing. There is no building, no tall building that is affordable. And this question was raised in the morning session as well. So how do you make tall buildings affordable? And like Anthony Wood said, maybe you need to start reducing your expectation of standards or the amenities maybe that a tall building may offer. Reduce your expectation of standards, mixed-use developments, and like I said earlier, revenue-generating models. They might be a good idea. So I'd just like to, again, say that tall buildings will cease to be an option in the future, at least for cities like Mumbai. And it is only through sustainable strategies and designing buildings for human needs that we can make highly engineered tall buildings feel like homes people would love to spend their lives in. That's it. Thank you.